So now, it's my great pleasure to introduce our closing keynote speaker, Dr. Mike Evans. Dr. Evans is an associate professor in family medicine and public health at the University of Toronto, staff physician at St. Michael's Hospital, and a scientist at the Li Ka-shing Knowledge Institute. I suspect he may be the only person in the room who has delivered a baby, started a medical school for the public, written both a best-selling textbook of medicine and a children's book, has a CBC radio show, was a doctor at the Sochi Olympics, a water boy for Wendell Clark, runs a media lab and a film company, and has an endowed chair at the University of Toronto, and has 10 million views on YouTube. So please welcome me in joining Dr. Evans as he pulls together some of these seemingly disparate experiences into learning lessons for all of us.
Thank you. Wow, I feel like Justin Timberlake. Thanks so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here, not just because it's a great conference, but I just came from my clinic, and my last patient took 5 times the maximum dose of Viagra. And then we had a fire in our clinic, which is the second fire we've had at St. Mike's this week. So I had like 7 fire trucks roll up, and all the firemen come in while I had this guy in a room with ice pack on. Anyways, we worked it all out, and he's fine, but I'm very happy not to be there. I'm going to just begin by saying, I think mostly when we're doing talks these days, we sort of say where we're compromised, but I just want to say that I probably don't know as much about physical activity in kids as you do. And when I was actually thinking about this talk, I was thinking, I actually started to build, some of my slides on activity. And then as I was doing it, I was sort of realizing that you guys have probably seen 4,000 slides on activity in kids. So I've sort of gone a little different direction. I would say, though, as I was looking at the literature, and maybe this isn't true, but it seems so, kind of siloed. So there was, walkable communities and school and family life and culture. And getting, around town and et cetera, et cetera. And it seems so siloed and which is a huge problem in all our worlds. Listening to the comments just now, this sort of standing back. I mean, I hate to go back to Viagra. Viagra is a perfect example. When they came out with Viagra, if you talk to the people at Pfizer, there was like 37 steps. So they just moved it along a little bit at a time. So, Guy Lafleur would come on and say, I hear other men have erectile dysfunction. I don't have it. And then they had Bob Dole. And now, we're at the point where we can watch a commercial and they don't have to say all the horrible side effects of medications. They can just say the blue pill and you know exactly what it is. So my point here is that they changed a whole culture by sort of taking that big step and doing sort of 27 little changes to the culture around our thinking around a common problem that wasn't talked about. So today I'm going to sort of paint a slightly bigger picture of where health is going, kind of talk a little bit about patient engagement. I'm booked for an hour, but I'm going to be shorter than that. I'm going to show 3 movies. One that has to do with the topic, but 2 that have absolutely nothing to do with kids and activity, but I think are kind of great examples of what I call peer-to-peer healthcare and curation. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I mean by We Suck Less Incorporated and how you can be a disruptor. So just to say, as Jen introduced, I'm a family doc. I see patients at St. Mike's, but most of my time these days I'm running a media lab, and it's sort of filmmakers and designers and illustrators and patients and social media mavens, and we kind of crunch them together with researchers and clinicians and sort of tell evidence-based stories, and then we embed them in the relationships of care, which are often in media, but actually the biggest healthcare workforce in the world we hardly use, which is the public. And so we try and make our media sort of infectious enough that people will spread it to one another, what we call a healthy virus. So, so we try and focus not just on people. I mean, patients know that they're not supposed to smoke or eat, Scottish fast food or whatever. But it's actually the art of sort of engaging them so they feel more involved. So whether it's a health messaging or whether it's in the clinic, this has been shown over and over again to make a difference. And so we try and give them obviously the right knowledge, but also combine that with the sense of being more involved and more engaged. And we do that by kind of bringing together what we call critical thinking. So, what's the evidence? Often the things we're talking about, there isn't great evidence. And we kind of mush that together with design thinking. Where it's very visual, instead of sort of isolating the individual interventions, we kind of group them together. We think about the minds of our user and what they actually want to know. It takes us a long time. It's sort of Mark Twain. I didn't have enough time to write you a short letter. So we put a lot of time into our scripts, all with this sort of concept of engaging change. So, and when we actually look at the healthcare system, it's, I work in the bottom right-hand corner of that, so in a big academic healthcare center, of which 1 in 1,000 problems makes it in there. About a third comes into primary care, so family doctor, nurse practitioner, pharmacist, physio. But 2/3 of healthcare problems are actually solved at home. And even the institutions, the ones that actually can engineer that in the best way, are going to be the ones that survive and flourish. But when we think about investing in the healthcare system, we don't think about where actually most of the action is. It's so interesting. I think a lot of our work has been focused on the person in the center. So the person in the center of this picture is an amalgamation of all the people around the outside. And we've sort of built this one-size-fits-all educational prescription. Yet, each of those people, those 4 people along the bottom, have completely different ways of understanding, different literacy, numeracy, certainly different levers for change. And you know that with your clinical work, is that each person is different. And that's the kind of art of care, is that I'm standing with that person and I kind of understand what their levers are. For some, it's they need to know more. For others, it's kind of helping their sense of self-efficacy. For others, it's developing a kind of peer support group. So thinking about all those groups is a big thing for us, and that's going to be your challenge in the future. And I think, in a lot of ways, if we just look at the front of this picture, healthcare is going to totally change. Like my clinic, as it is now, is so blockbuster video. I mean, I'm doing a big project with Kaiser Permanente now. When you go visit your doctor at Kaiser, they're all on salary, but when you go visit them, it's like, do you want to see Mike in the clinic? Do you want to email him? Or do you want to phone him? It's a whole different interface, and our clinics are going to be so much more like that. So I'm going to see a kid that is inactive. At Kaiser Permanente, by the way, one of their vital signs on their EHR is that adults in that example are doing 150 minutes a week. So, and if they aren't, an automatic video will go out to them. The other thing is sort of interesting is developing programs that embed, so I don't know, a good example would be insomnia. So when we look at insomnia, people think sleeping pills are the most effective, but the most effective thing is actually cognitive behavioral therapy. By the way, I saw a patient this morning that took a sleeping pill and a laxative at the same time. That is not something to do. If you take one thing away from this talk. Anyway, so, all the patients want the sleeping pills, but actually a more effective thing is cognitive behavioral therapy. But there's one CBT doer for 470,000 people. So now there's been 10 years of randomized trials of testing internet-based CBT, and you're going to see more and more of that coming into play, where I'm prescribing something over the web that will come to you. eHarmony. So I took a flight the other day with the COO of eHarmony. How many of you are in eHarmony? No, I'm just kidding. So eHarmony is a internet dating service. Apparently, we're all on it now. And so their sort of special sauce is they do a 50-minute interview with you, or a questionnaire, and it's supposed to match you sort of psychically and character-wise with your best life partner. It's not about looks. Just as a sub-story, and they've had like 1 million babies born to eHarmony. And I said, wow, 50 minutes. I can't even get people to fill out a 5-minute survey. And the guy goes, well, they might get sex at the end of our survey. I'm like, oh, that beats out the Indigo gift card. So what's so interesting is the company was about to go bankrupt. New CEO came in. He wanted to put pictures up. The psychologist who was running, whose idea it was, said, no, this is not about looks, it's about personality. The guy said, look, we're either going to go bankrupt or we put the pictures up. When they put the pictures on, it 8 times the connection rate. And the company flourished and I guess is a leader in the area. So what's so interesting is in academia, we would never put the pictures up. That would be un-PC. And so this is actually a big lesson for us, is that, we're running an active company, what we call a moving company, and we're making it's what they call a B corporation, so it's kind of rated on its social good and its environmental good, not just money, but we're trying to make it so it makes money, it's self-funding. And the Public Health Agency of Canada is hopefully a partner in that going forward, because they're much more interested in funding something that's self-funding rather than a grant that shows something and then goes away. And so you're going to see much more of this sort of social entrepreneurship in how we change people's behavior. This is sort of interesting. I just chaired a provincial sort of overview of vaccines. And vaccines are very interesting. So, we now have, HPV vaccine for cancer, and you're going to see more and more vaccines. So it's not just the flu shot. It'll come out for Alzheimer's or heart attacks. And they segmented the population. So, for instance, when we're looking at vaccines, we have these sort of 3 C's when we think about behavior. So one is their confidence, just a kind of knowledge piece. They actually think vaccines might work for them, which, by the way, 54% of Ontarians thought that vaccines worsen their immune system. So there's some basic kind of 101 stuff to do. The second was convenience, that it's easy to get. And the third was competing priorities. So, I'm a kind of reactive life manager. I've got 3 overprogrammed kids, and my wife delivers babies. So for me, the biggest thing is being able to get a flu shot at the local pharmacy, because I don't have time to go to my family doc. Whereas the next person needs to be, kind of convinced, and the next person needs it to kind of move up the priority scale. So, but when you think about your families or your kids, you're going to have very different species. And again, those species are going to have different ways of changing. The families are going to have different ways of understanding. So, proactive holistics would be probably your best customers in an active family, but they're our worst customer for vaccines. Do you see what I'm saying? They're kind of kumbaya, and they're super healthy, and they're great, and I don't want to put something in my body. So, so thinking about segmenting your market for families around activity will be very interesting. I just spent the week before last out at Apple in Cupertino, and I signed all these NDAs, so that means I can't tell you all the deets, but I would say what's so interesting is what you're going to see is the wearable with the phone. And the sensor stuff on the wearables are, so right now we're, Nike Fuel Band and tracking activity. It doesn't tell whether I'm going up or down the stairs. It doesn't tell me whether I'm playing tennis or hockey or running. The new ones will have gyrometers and everything else in it. So my job, in a lot of ways, will be prescribing an app. So if my patient has high blood pressure, the sensor will be doing that, will data visualize that back to the patient in a way that makes sense to them. The app will customize to whether they're on 2 or 3 medications. Siri will tell them in a Jewish mother voice or in a Scottish mother voice or something to get out and get active and reduce the salt in the meal they're about to cook, whatever it is. And so it'll customize to your activity, and it'll be able to tell how much activity you are because it's linked to your phone or your wearable that's walking around all the time. And it'll show you how much activity is coming back. So when your mom goes for a hip replacement, it'll boost her, because we know prehab makes a big difference. And when we follow people with hip and knee replacement, they have the operation, they become pain-free, but they don't go up on their activity again. So it'll get them moving again. And it'll actually show them all the people in Ontario having hip and knee replacements, show them where they are pain-wise and activity-wise, and it'll show them where they are, which is a very strong behavior change device. So you'll see this overlap of behavioral medicine and big data. Big data and small dashboards, I would say. And this will be, you can see how this area is just going to crash, as we give people too much information and not useful information. But it will crash, I think, but it will come up again as we get to kind of intertwine these two worlds. It's going to be so interesting and changing, I think. So I'm just going to do a couple of slides on innovation. So number one, at least the thing that's worked best for us is changing up your team. So I used to kind of build things with doctors and nurses, hospital admin people. I don't do that anymore. I invite them, and sometimes they're part of our things, but it's more working with patients and creatives and filmmakers, and our team is completely different. And it just makes it so much more powerful. And we have such a limited view, us givers of healthcare, on what's actually really happening. You ask any cardiologist what actually happens when they go home compared to what they think happens, and the ethnography is so different. So changing up your team, I think, is important. This is just your own sort of fallibility. So one of my partners did an intervention on sexually transmitted infections, a sort of educational session, and had his teenager in to staple the condoms to the backboard, and sort of didn't do a great job, and so it was hilarious. And the guy hammered 400 of them out there. And so this became the best session because this guy did this hilarious thing and didn't mean to. And so and it turned into our best kind of educational session. And so we have this big sign on our we have this poster at our lab, sort of reminding us our fallibility. The point being that success and failure are pointing in the same direction. And in our world, in physical activity, which is pretty politically correct, and in healthcare, we are very, very poor at failure. It has to be perfect before we roll it out. This is a classic. This is from McKinsey last week, where we look at kind of how things sort of transform, and you have all these early adopters. It's sort of like a Rogers diffusion curve, and so what we do is we build MVP, so minimum viable product. And so you have your little idea. It could be a community intervention. It could be an app. It could be a one-on-one. It could be a PDF. It could be a walking meeting, whatever it is. And you just roll it out there, minimum viable product. It's not going to work for everybody. I have a guy in my clinic who's always like, that'll never work with my shut-ins. That'll never work with my teenagers. And he's probably right. But we still kind of roll it out there and just see what happens. And like a classic example, I work with a group called the Institute for Healthcare Improvement down in Cambridge, and we're on a 90-day project. And so we take a wicked healthcare problem, so it could be falls in seniors or email clinic, and we have 90 days, and we aren't experts. We have 90 days to kind of talk to the grand fromages in the area, do a bit of a lit search, build an intervention, drop it into clinic, show a measurable outcome. So our failure rate is like 60%. But it's so interesting because in that 90 days after we've done it, and we've often failed, we know exactly what needs to happen. And how many of you have been involved in these interventions that are lasting like 4 years, and the thing you want to do at the beginning now doesn't make sense? So this kind of rapid iteration failure thing is important. And that's why the motto in our lab is "We Suck Less Incorporated." So we put out something that sucks a little less than what's out there and let it rip. I just wanted to say, you know, one of the things, so we run this whiteboard medical school on YouTube, and we've had a easy time funding what I would call the silos of healthcare. So we just did a great one on dialysis, and we're thrilled, by the way, to do that. It's never going to be viral. It's a very small group. It's a very tough scenario and tough decision making. But where we'd love to do more, where we've had a hard time funding, is what I call School of Life projects. And this is kind of getting at this cascade of health that you and I might be working on, you know, physical activity and moving, and the next person's working on, you know, better sleep. And when people have better sleep, they make better, you know, health decisions. Do they have nudges in their world? Do they make the connection that when they're active, they actually kind of feel better? Are they able to have the cognitive reframing skills? And so I just want you to sort of put that in your mind a little bit, is just not to get too caught up in the, you know, A1C and the blood pressure and the whatever, but think a little bit more around the things our patients care a bit more about, rightly or wrongly, and B, the cascade of health. And I always think we should just be investing a little bit more in what I would call School of Life, and thinking about kids, and having them having some skills around, you know, cognitive distortions and thinking styles, and having healthy relationships and attitude. I mean, my teenagers can certainly use an attitude upgrade. So I don't know. It's just something to think a little bit about, is to kind of think a little bit outside the silos. And so when I'm actually thinking about my patients in my clinic, you know, this is what I do all day. I focus on the labs and tell them not to eat so much crap. I think about the determinants of health. 11% of patients are lonely, you know, or isolated, and we'll see more of those in the clinic. But when I actually look at what I want in my patient, I want them to be active. Like, to me, that trumps obesity. If I was a minister of health and you said you want to put $10 million into obesity or activity, I'd do activity in a heartbeat. You know, I've got lots of obese patients that are active, and when we look at the health outcomes of active obese patients, they're way better than the skinny sedentaries. You know, show me the long-term randomized control trials on obesity. I'm not saying I wouldn't love if my patients lost weight and their arthritis would be better and their heart disease risk would go down and their cancer risk would go down. But you see what I'm saying? I just want them to be active and a little less obsessed about a weight. You know, I'll say, that's great you're losing weight, but I just want you to keep moving. You know, optimism. So interesting. You know, like in the Women's Health Initiative, they follow patients. You know, if you're optimistic, and by optimistic, I don't just mean a Leafs fan, which I am. I mean, you know, you're not hammering on the horn after 0.4 microseconds of the guy in front of you not moving. That, you know, when you sort of meet somebody, you're assuming that they're a good person, that you can sort of see that you're going to have the odd, you know, storm for the odd rainbow. And that, you know, that optimism is there, and you can learn optimism. Martin Seligman's got a great book about learning optimism, and it's actually more the reverse. When you look at the cynical hostiles, you know, they have 23% increase in rates of cancer. So these cognitive reactions are huge. Like there's a great Swedish trial by Gustafsson looking at heart attacks, patients that have had, you know, they get usual care or usual care plus CBT and stress management. They had 42% less heart attacks at a year. So how we think is so important. And then the final thing is just that I want these sort of skills, sort of like the skills I want in my residents. I want them to be reflective learners. I want them to kind of say, oh, I'm pretty good at that, and I'm not good at that, and how am I going to change it? And no, I didn't do a great job of changing that, and and they're constantly kind of tweaking it. And that's what we want in our patients around their skills. Like I want them to be, micro changers. I want them to be tweaking all the time and sort of and not being perfect. I'm a fan of 80-20, that, we're not perfect all the time. Eat chocolate, but that there is some change there. So I'm just going to show you a little movie called Make Your Day Harder, which I actually put out. First time I announced it by mistake was after a show I did on erectile dysfunction. Sorry, my erectile dysfunction is my main theme today. And we got a lot of views that week. But this is just one, obviously is thinking more about adults, but I actually totally think this is true for kids, and I'd love to do one for kids, and I think this is true for the whole family. So just going to let it rip.
Hi, I'm Dr. Mike Evans. Usually I'm talking about the science behind best health, but today I wanted to start a movement called Let's Make Our Day Harder. I know that sounds counterintuitive. In fact, usually I'm asking, how can I make it easier to do the right thing? But let me explain. A recent review in JAMA Internal Medicine compared the health of baby boomers to previous generations. It showed what you might expect. Medical advances have led to longer life expectancies. But it also shows something else. U.S. baby boomers have more chronic disease, more obesity, and lower self-rated health than members of the previous generation at the same age, even though we smoke less and work out more than the Mad Men generation. So what's the difference? Well, I think for a variety of reasons that include technology, culture, and attitudes, we have a severe generational case of sitting disease. We watch phones, tablets, and TVs. We stare at computers while we work and pride ourselves on not moving for 4 hours straight. We don't walk to a friend's house or a coworker's office. We text them. I text my kids in my own house. Don't get me wrong, I love technology. There's lots of good to be had, but I also think we need to be mindful that as technology becomes more ubiquitous, it can loot the medicine chest of our single best treatment for good health: being active, moving. We shop on the internet instead of walking to the store. We have vacuums that automatically circulate so we don't have to. Electric toothbrushes so we don't have to move our hands up and down. With the push of a button, we can manipulate the TV, the music, the temperature. We might even choose our house based on these conveniences or on the size of the TV room or garage, not walkability. Living further away gets you a bigger house, but it can also mean another half hour a day of sitting in your car. To compare ourselves to the recent low-tech, simpler past, let's look at the Amish. The average Amish dude walks 18,000 steps a day. The average Amish woman, 15,000. American men walk 7,200 steps a day and women 5,200. In Canada, we're a bit better, and I actually find these numbers a bit high, but 2009 data show 9,500 steps per day for men and 8,400 for women. Unfortunately, this drops by about 1,500 steps a day once we hit 60. I think it's time to change our prevailing attitude. Maybe easier isn't really better after all. So how's about you and I start a movement, an anti-pushing the button so the door opens automatically for us movement. I'm not talking about extra stuff like going to the gym or running. If you do that, it's great. I'm talking about the health gold of our daily habits, what I call tweak the week. It's about looking at your week and seeing where you can make it harder by taking the stairs or riding your bike or getting off a stop early on your daily commute. Have a walking meeting instead of sitting in a conference room. I had a 90-year-old patient tell me the other day that he gets off 2 floors above his floor. When I asked him why, he said, well, I can't go up the stairs too well anymore, but I can still go down. Can you flip technology and use your phone or other wearable to monitor and remind you to move or stand more? How about going for a walk at lunch instead of just going somewhere else to sit? Can you reframe buying a push mower or a rake or a snow shovel as an opportunity? Instead of driving around the parking lot for 10 minutes trying to find that spot that's 10 feet closer, can you just park farther away in that spot reserved for people who want to live longer and have a higher quality of life? Let's rethink this a bit. Let's you and I and our loved ones and our coworkers and our friends, let's all mix in a little low-tech into our high-tech. Let's do something that's totally in our control. Let's make our day harder.
That's it. Thank you. Yeah, so it's funny because when I put that out, I emailed it to a friend of mine, and she goes, "Oh man, I was just about to order the thing so I can adjust my blinds from my bed." That was so awesome, that thing. Now I can't order it. So this is, I do think a lot of what you're going to struggle with in the sort of next part of your battle, I guess, is the culture. And so sometimes I like to look at my last 48 hours. So on the, I don't know, 2 or 3 days ago, I tweeted this, and it always blows me away, all the data on if I tell a patient to do something, they're actually more likely to do it, which always shocks me how effective that is. And it sort of plays on the, that we sort of need permission to do these things rather than just doing that. And this is sort of an example of, it's just a prototype, but we're kind of re-engineering the exercise prescription. So making it much more, I would say, cognitive dissonance, something you could hand out at Target, not just in the clinic. And that just gets people thinking about, I can do all these things for you, but the one thing that beats everything else in terms of effectiveness, the thing that combats all the things that kind of get trickier as we get older, the one kind of magic red shiny pill is exercise. And so we have fun with the kind of side effects may include, less erectile dysfunction, less or better memory, less stress, 42% less anxiety, et cetera, et cetera. The second thing is interesting. I cycled here, and I cycled from my clinic, and I was counseling this patient with a large sort of body surface area, and I said, we talked about a bike, and it's a beautiful day today, and he's like, yeah, maybe I'll go for the bike. And then he goes, but I would never cycle in Toronto. Are you kidding? And I always find that interesting. There's a nice BMJ editorial about this, about, what is the calculation there of me wiping out or getting in an accident versus reduced cardiac events, longer life, et cetera, et cetera. And for me, it's a total no-brainer. I take this sort of same route all the time. I'm not saying I don't wipe out once every 2 years on the ice. I do. But from my, and of course, there's my own calculation. It's not that it gets me to meetings more predictably or that I'm fitter or it's better for the environment. It's just I know I feel better at the end of the day, And that's something that's so interesting. That's true, especially with food stuff, is that we eat, when I was 20 and I ate a bowl of French fries and wings, I felt great. When I hit 35 or 40, I just felt like crap. But I did it for another 10 years, So, it's just this sort of self-awareness. And the other part is, so this is last night, my youngest son, Angus, wiped out in the schoolyard. And so my wife was going to deliver a baby at St. Joe's and then dropped him in a merge while she went to deliver the baby. Anyways, when she came back, he had a cast on and maybe a scaphoid fracture. I'll find out later today. But, what's interesting is these sort of conversations that I have around making play less supervised or more dangerous or more, in my mind, I would gladly, and I recognize as part of the point is not everybody would have the same calculation, I would gladly have the odd accident in exchange for my kids' ability to fall and to, widen their perspective. And, so what's interesting about that to me is it starts as sort of a playground issue and then a kind of school issue, and then maybe, it's the insurance for the school is this or that, or whatever it is. There's all these sort of micro stories. But actually what it becomes is a parenting story, which is my final slide here, is we lived in France for a while when our kids were younger, quite a bit younger, and I won't tell you how young. And in France, they would pressure us to leave the kids alone. What kind of parent are you? you're hovering over them too much. And so we would go on long bicycling rides and leave our kids alone. There's a pool there all the time. And then when we came back to Canada, we couldn't leave the house. And we just thought, oh, that's so interesting. It's just because we're fearful of getting judged or some cultural thing around our kids' ability to experiment. And we didn't know our neighbors in France. And so I find that you start as a kind of playground issue, and really what you guys are into is parenting, And in our generation, what I call bulldozer parenting, that we're kind of going ahead of our kids, making sure they don't fail. And so it's the same message, is, trying to get our kids to fail more and to fall more. One of the things I just think is a huge opportunity here is, and I think it has to do with that, this first shirt here, is that when I tweeted this, now it has all the sort of Twitter soup of a high retweet weight. So it's an image, it's got some cognitive dissonance to it, it's funny, it's a little bit shocking, it's got the word ass in it. But the big thing is exercise of religion. 23 and a half hours, our video on that, it's just people, it's so powerful for them. And that's what you have going for you, is you have this cult of exercise. And you have this incredible group of people that are committed to it, which sometimes will be a downside, but mostly it'll be an upside. And I think peer-to-peer is a great opportunity around exercise. And when we think about peer-to-peer, so most of our health messaging is focused on, we tell people what they already know. So don't pour boiling hot coffee on your crotch. Or en français, ne pourrez pas de area de ooh la la. But what we've discovered in our lab is stories trump data. So I spent a lot of my career telling people data, and now, we storify it. And then we embed those in the relationships of care. And relationships trump stories. And the relationships of care, yes, they're, sick kids to a patient or me to a patient. But it's actually more, mother to daughter, daughter to mother, friend to friend. And so, I think the goal here is to tell kind of evidence-based stories and embed them in the relationships of care. And so just on that note, I'm a family doc, so I'm spending a lot of my time sort of wondering, is this bacterial or viral? And in our lab, we think of it in a different way. We ask ourselves, how can we make this more infectious? How can we make something that people would send to one another without our prompting them? And so when you're kind of thinking about that kind of health messaging stuff, I think it's very important that kind of crosses your mind. We spend so much time on working out whether it's factually correct, which is obviously important, but I think you really have to kind of think about, would people send this to one another? And so the best Petri dish for that is YouTube. So if you look at, what's been loaded on YouTube in the last 30 days trumps what's been, more than what's been loaded on the 3 big American networks in the last 60 years, which is part of the problem with YouTube. But incredible Petri dish. So we put out our first video, 23 and a half hours, and honestly, I sent it. This is a classic We Suck Less Incorporated. Sent it out to our, my sister, who's very socially connected, and my hockey team. And actually, I was keynoting the Heart and Stroke on the Friday. It was on the Wednesday. And then I had 13,000 views in the morning and 17,000. So now it's at sort of 4 million views with no push at all. And by the way, I keep getting invited to these conferences about viral videos. And the one thing that sort of comes out as the one single predictive, there's no magic formula, we'd all be doing it, is authenticity. Is that if the person's authentic, even if it's, a drunk, anesthetized kid or a cat. If it's authentic, it kind of works. And so thinking about that, and then we sort of made a deal with YouTube, and you know, we have 10 million views, but they have, you know, hairdressers with more views than us. But they're kind of into us because we actually are good for people. We tell the truth. We're not trying to sell something. And so we've built it's everything from, you know, stress management to acne to HPV to opioids to dialysis to make your day harder, you name it. And so and we've got some really interesting ones coming up. So this has been a lot of fun. And some of the lessons have been, you know, a lot of institutions just post their stuff on their site. Well, we've had over 1 million people view our stuff on other people's site, on other people's Facebook page is a classic example. Interactivity, I'll talk a little bit about. Having a mobile, being able to see it in a mobile way is pretty critical. So half our, you know, like especially if you look at you know, less developed countries. So in India, 99% of our viewership is mobile. And now you get up a momentum. So we have like 300,000 or 400,000 views a month. And this is with no funding, no big, we just put out stuff. And partnering with .orgs to kind of build things for their individual illness of interest. Interactivity is interesting. So, you know, this is HPV vaccines. So some woman inboxed me on the YouTube saying, Dr. Evans, love your stuff. It's a bit passive aggressive. And then saying, but how could you recommend HPV? It's, you know, it says on the side of the box that 1 in 1,000 women die. And I was sort of passive aggressive back and said, thanks, EMSSV66. Actually, the trials, 26 women died of the 23,000 women in the study they're talking about there, and it was done in the southern U.S., and so 4 died of gunshot wounds, and 12 died in car accidents, and 3 died of leukemia, or whatever it was, and they try and track it back to the HPV, and it wasn't linked. So I'm able to kind of interact that way. Do you see what I'm saying? Quickly. And it's hard to do. Not every organization can do that, but that's sort of an interesting part of this is you can get into conversations. And we've had all these sort of interesting spin-offs. So this is Human.co. This guy, Renato Olivares in San Francisco, watched 23 and a half hours, was like 300 pounds, started walking every day, is now 200 pounds. And he's an app maker. So he built an app that when you walk half an hour, it goes, great job. That's it. I love it. And then this is Orange is the New Black. So who's seen that? Yeah. So I had a little bit of a hard time explaining that to the nuns at St. Mike's, the sort of plot theme. Great lesbian affair. It's got everything. But so they profiled 23 and a half hours in there, and we had no idea. And so it's kind of fun. And then, you know, this is just an interesting, you know, kind of YouTube Petri dish thing, is that we let people pretend they were me. So we have women pretending they're me, and you know, it's translating everything from Gaelic to Arabic. And so we had this public health doctor in Riyadh translating to Arabic, and we put it online, and we had 800,000 views in a week. Like, it was the 5th most watched thing in all of YouTube. Ultimate Pizza Sandwich is still in first place, so we got some work to do. But 800,000 views in a week. I mean, the videos are expensive to produce, but the sound translation is like $200. And I think Arabic nations have the 2nd or highest rate of diabetes in the world. So it just makes you think the kind of cost-effective messaging opportunities. So I just want to show you another quick movie around what I would call peer-to-peer healthcare. This has nothing to do with activity. It does have something to do with kids. So this is called The Truth of It, and we have a documentary filmmaker named Wendy Rowland, who's a superstar. And so CPAC, Canadian Partnership Against Cancer, was getting a lot of negative feedback about, not negative, but we need to do more psychosocially for our patients. And so we had this idea where we just go and get advice from patients to give to one another. initially it was, what would you tell yourself if you had to do it again? And then people pushed back on us and said, I don't want to pretend I'm doing this again. Then it was, okay, you have breast cancer, prostate cancer, whatever you have, and your best friend walks in and says, you'll never guess it, but I've got the same thing. What would you tell them? And then we divided up into different sections. So it was, getting the news or body image. And this little grouping was around telling your kids you have cancer. So Janet is this, wonderfully smart person with breast cancer, one of the fewer women that has a very bad outcome with breast cancer. It's metastasized to her brain. She's been with her partner a long time, but they just got married. And this is her explaining to her kids, or what's the best way to talk to your kids about cancer. And, God forbid you're in that situation, but I just want you to think, would you rather a pamphlet or Janet?
As a parent, I think our instinct tends to be, okay, let's protect our children. This is too heavy for them. This is, let's pretend that this isn't happening. In fact, studies have showed it's the complete opposite. The more information that you can give to your children, the more real you can be with them, the less fear and anxiety that they have. Because they know you. They're going to understand, hushed tones on the phone. They're going to, even perhaps, jump to a worse conclusion and perhaps even blame themselves for something that's going on. We've sought out counseling for our kids so that we can really help them through their grieving. Things have changed, definitely, knowing that now my breast cancer is considered terminal. That's moved us into a new stage of being honest with the kids. But kids are really good at balancing opposite ideas. They can understand the reality of the situation. Okay, they know mommy has cancer. They know that the doctors, say that that's, that mommy's going to die. But they can understand that, but they can actually hope for something different. And they can balance those ideas at the same time, even better than an adult can. So I've actually learned a lot from my kids, and in that regard, they can process something quite seriously, and then when it becomes too much for them, they'll go off and play, and that's a good thing. Kids are able to do that. So I would definitely advise to be open and honest with your kids.
Sorry, that one still makes me a bit misty, but it's just, she's so thoughtful. And our failure with that one was we didn't actually interview the family members. I mean, cancer happens obviously to individuals, but it really happens to families and social networks. And so we had to kind of go back to their homes and interview them. But it's just an example of the wisdom of people that have kind of been through it. And why aren't we grabbing that? So, infographics. So when we look at web behavior, videos and infographics are the two things that people kind of click on. So here's one we did, a Prabhat Jha's New England Journal article, and it's sort of saying, it's a huge, long New England Journal article, but basically it says if you quit at 30, you save 10 years of life. When you quit at 60, you're still saving 6 years of life. And I've got a lot of patients at 60 who don't want to quit because they think it's too late. So I just show them the infographic and we walk through it. This is an example. We kind of pre-do these text messages that kind of go back and forth. And it's sort of as if your good friend is a doctor who knows a lot about whatever it is. And it's sort of just a text that would go back and forth. And it's short and sweet, and we can drive people to bigger and better resources. So lots of fun. We did a video on acne. So acne is pretty crazy, and there's like 140 different creams and treatments. And so we had to break it down for the teenagers. And so again, an infographic that fits with a video. So This is very interesting. So, how many of you remember? So, this is Don Lowe talking on the CBC about his end of life. Yeah? Does that ring a bell? So, Don is famous for, or was famous for, he was kind of the one to lead us through SARS. Infectious disease guy, very thoughtful guy. And he had a big brain tumor in his head. I guess he wouldn't have it in another place. And he couldn't, it hurt him to hear himself talk, and it hurt him to hear other people talk. And we were doing this series of people at their end of life. And so his wife Maureen was a CBC health reporter, now a physician assistant. And so Don wanted to talk about, he wanted physician-assisted death. So not everybody in this room would agree with that. I'm not sure you totally know, to be honest, till you're in that moment, really. But we just taped him. And then we didn't think much about it. We were kind of racing to get it out before he passed, which we failed at. And then we put it online. And then the CBC and the whole media, it obviously touched a nerve. And suddenly there was like 70,000 views in a week, and it was on every TV show. And it, as Deb Matthews says, it went from being not on the agenda to within 10 days, it was the kind of front of the agenda at the federal provincial health ministers meeting. So, I don't know how many of you have tried to affect policy, but 10 days is a pretty short time to move the dial. And so, again, this sort of a video that actually captures where people are at is so interesting to me. This is just to say that, you guys, I'm sure, are farther ahead on this, but just that your interventions are going to have to be more thoughtful, or not thoughtful, more combined. So this is a trial we're doing on getting people moving in workspaces. Do you guys know about Nudge? Probably talked a bit about Nudge. So Nudge is, every grocery store you go to is fully nudged out. It's things in the environment that drive you to do behaviors that you often are not aware of. Or if we put salad in front of burgers in the buffet, the salad rate goes up 25%. So this is the classic nudge that I took at this airport in Schiphol in Amsterdam. So their problem there, as is the case with many men's urinals around the world, is spillage. And so some genius came in and engraved a black fly in the deepest recess of the urinal. And all the men from different cultures, languages, and whatever just come up and try and kill the fly. And they reduce their spillage rate by 80%. So my wife's trying to Sharpie one into our toilets. But anyways, so that's a perfect nudge. So trying to create nudges, walkable cities would be a kind of example of that. But how can we kind of create nudges? How can we track people, this whole sort of social thing and give people feedback on where they are compared to their friends? Some people are competitive, some are not. And then rewarding. So we're just doing a thing on rewards and seniors want more social rewards. They want to go to films together. So these sort of complex interventions are going to be interesting. And this is just my final point, and I'll just end with a movie, is to think about curation. So not all of you are, have a media lab, but you can all curate. This WordPress site costs like $80, and we can set them up in a day. If you're not into that, you can, this is my personal Facebook page. But you can also set, and doctors are always asking me, if somebody wants to friend me on Facebook, should I go for it? And I say, no. You don't want them seeing your last drunken trip to Whistler. So a Facebook fan page is just one way. And you can just post stuff on there. And if you're doing whatever it is you're interested in, you can sort of drive a whole bunch of stuff onto that, a sort of Pinterest for Facebook. And it's easy peasy to set up. So, and you can actually see your data and see, oh, people are interested in that, they're not interested in this. So I'm just going to show you, end with a quick film about, sorry, it sounds depressing, but it's not. It's about end of life. And it's this guy sort of off the charts, reframing end of life. And I send this to my patients and my families in this sort of zone. And it's so interesting watching how a little piece of media can change somebody's perceptions.
In 6 weeks' time, I will be dead. I will be cremated. I will face huge fear. But it is an extraordinary experience. This is the most exciting and the most extraordinary journey of my life. My only regret is it ends. I'd like to be on this journey with you almost forever and a day.
I was asked to shoot an intimate portrait of a man that I didn't know. I knew that he was very ill, but I really wasn't sure what to expect.
It's only when they say, you know, Philip Gould, you're going to die, get used to it, and this is going to happen in weeks or months. It's only when that happens you're aware of death. And only when that happens also that suddenly life screams at you in its intensity. I saw my children born, I saw them born, and I saw the incredible, massive potential of that moment. And when my father died and the air left his body, it was as powerful as the air entering the body of my daughters. And I knew that the purpose here now was to give as much love as I could to people who mattered to me, even though I was dying. And my life became death. It gained a kind of quality and a power it had never had before. It entered a new zone, which was the death zone.
Oh, sorry, it's my wife. Just 1 second. Hi, darling. Yeah, you okay with all this then, darling? It's lovely. I feel good. It's going to be beautiful there. I'm going to love it.
After an intense, intimate discussion, Philip and I decided to shoot his portrait at Highgate Cemetery on his own grave.
Only when you accept death can you free yourself from it, can you deal with it, can you move forward from it. So acceptance is the absolute key. At that moment, you gain freedom, and you gain power, and you gain courage. This is it. This is going to be, you know, my home for eternity. I do really feel, in my mind, I've reframed it, I've changed it. It's not some gloomy, ghastly thing. It's this, I just think this is such a wonderful, wonderful idea, the community of the living and the dead. And I have no fear at all about going to this.
It's great.
I'm happy about it. I feel a sense, actually, almost of optimism about it, of almost looking forward to it as the next stage, and certainly very, very comfortable. You sort of think, God, I'm scared, I'm a coward. I thought I was a coward. I was the kind of guy who was too frightened to kind of go too fast on a bike in the evening time. You think, I can't do this, I can't do chemotherapy, it's too painful, it's too horrible. But you do it. And then they say, by the way, mate, you're not going to have a stomach. And you'll never eat normally again, ever again. And you kind of get used to it. And then you sort of think, actually, every single thing they throw at you is handleable. You can do it. I have my wife and my children there for me at this moment because I am defining myself now through death. I'm giving meaning to myself through death. Without that, I do not know what I would do. I rely upon them enormously, almost completely. I try and lead them. I try and inspire them. I try and show strength. I had a couple of really tough nights. My breathing was bad, my coughing was bad, everything was bad, and Gail was in a bad state too. And then I just lay there and thought, okay, this is bad, but this is death. And as long as I look death in the eye, and as long as I accept that I can choose the death that I seek and the death that I choose, I have some freedom here. I have some power here. I have some possibility to shape for myself my own death. And at that moment, I have a kind of freedom. I've had more moments of happiness in the last 5 months than perhaps the last few years. More moments of a kind of private ecstasy than really for many years, when I just feel at one with the world. The thing I'd like to say to my daughters is, I love them. And the thing I'd like to say to my wife is, I'm sorry I let you down, but my God, you're fantastic. And I'm not letting you down now. And you will have the best life afterwards, I believe. I love them all. That's what I want to say to them.
Yeah. Yeah, incredible. My wife's developed a fear of flying lately, and so she's going to London today, and so I'm now getting these texts that say, I love you so much, because she thinks she's going to die. So anyways, I was just thinking about that. So just to finish, suck less, fail more. I think to see yourself, instead of this sort of one little thing that you're pushing, and this one little event, just see yourself as a social entrepreneur, like a little business that you're kind of rolling this stuff out all the time, and you're just kind of making it better and better and better. I think build stuff that's infectious, what we call a healthy virus, and allow other people to kind of spread your good work. Connect the silos. I think there's a lot to be said for the kind of school of life stuff, and I think there's a big opportunity there. And finally, make your day harder. So thank you very much for having me, and I will be quiet.